Hey everybody, Aaron here at Future Retrospect, joined today by my friend Josh, who you may know from his channel Questler Comics. There might be a little crossover there since I've been on his channel quite a few times discussing a few of the Disney Plus shows, which, speaking of, we do have Loki coming out in the next week or two here. So I suppose we'll be discussing those episodes one by one on your channel over here in the next few weeks.
Sure. Can't wait for that.
Yeah. So, as you've probably seen from the title of the episode, we are going to be talking about The Expanse season one. So, this is a show that's been recommended to me quite a few times. Josh included, actually, I believe, brought it up most recently. And I was like, okay, I should probably watch this show. It's right up my alley. So, Josh, can you give us any sort of insight into where you're at with the show in terms of what you've seen?
Yeah, definitely. So, all caught up with the show to current season as it was rescued by Amazon, and so
Mhm.
I watched on Sci-Fi before that, and now the seasons that have been on Amazon, and yeah, I'm in love with the show. I watched season one and immediately got into the books and read all the books and most of the like there's some like novellas that go along with it as well, so really dived into this IP and I'm totally in love with it, and I'm super thrilled that you finally got into it,
Mhm.
and I'm really excited to talk to you about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, really looking forward to the insight that you can bring in regards to maybe some differences between the show and the books. And so I've only seen season one, so there's a lot I'm sure you'll have to hold back on in terms of things that are coming up in the future
Yeah, I will.
seasons. So that's completely fine. So before we get too far into the conversation, I did want to get both of our thoughts, and I'll start with you, Josh. When you think about season one, and I guess you have the full context of the show so far, what are your thoughts on season one? Do you like it? Do you think it's good? How does it fit into the when you think about the series as a whole in terms of how it kicks off the show?
For sure. So interestingly, I just rewatched most of season one today, in preparation for this recording. And I gotta say, the second time through, I liked it so much more than the first time I watched it. So, like I said, the first time I watched it, like immediately fell in love and super enjoyed it.
Mhm.
Um, but this time watching it through, kind of knowing where these character arcs go and where the plot goes, and it's very nostalgic. It's almost like watching that first part of the Fellowship of the Ring, which is like one of my favorite parts now, knowing where it goes with Return of the King and everything. That's kind of how it feels here, where it's like, oh, this the story is very oh, I'm going to avoid spoilers, but the
Yeah.
story is very it's here, and knowing that the story goes like this, I don't feel like that's that big of a spoiler, since that's kind of how most stories go. Um, it was really fun seeing these characters before they are like really developed, and how they're introduced, and the initial dynamics between them. And yeah, I really loved season one. But with that said, it's still I would probably put it kind of midway in the point with ranking it with all the rest of the seasons. So there's a lot to enjoy ahead of you.
Interesting. No, that's good because so my initial impression is positive. I really enjoyed it in the sense that I knew going in this was up my alley in terms of sci-fi and all that and the setting. So I was like instantly as soon as it started, I was like, "Yep, this is my type of show." So it was more so knowing that I liked that, was more so interested to see how that the story was going to unfold in terms of how crazy things were going to get and how much they would lean into the I guess the sci-fi part of it. So really enjoyed that as well. And I think it might have been you who mentioned kind of like, oh, season one is pretty good, but it gets better. So I that having finished it now, I'm even more excited because it was like it was. I wouldn't say it was like amazing and I was like blown away, but I had a really good time with the show. And knowing that it does get better based off of what you and other people have said, I'm like, sweet. If that's like a if this is the baseline, then that's really good because I enjoyed every episode that I watched.
Can I ask if there was a moment in the show that really won you over? Because there was, I know for me, it was the
Mm.
first time watching it, there was a moment where I'm like, oh, this is freaking awesome. Well,
Yeah.
was there a point for you, or was it like an episode for you? Like, when did it really like, oh,
Hmm.
this is interesting?
That's interesting. I think as I'm thinking about it now, for whatever reason, I don't know if this is like a the normal response to this, but the scene that sticks out to me that I thought was really cool and was unexpected was the interrogation scenes. When they got captured by the Martians, I guess that's what they're the Mars people are called, Martians.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
he walks into the room, takes the pill, whatever it is,
Mhm.
and then just starts like going into all this information that he knows about him. I remember being like, whoa, this is not the direction I was expecting this to go in terms of either the technology as well as just like the type of things we were getting. I thought that was a cool scene. And it was kind of one of those things where you could easily that scene could happen and you're like, well, that was dumb. Like we have no idea what happened. But I think they went about it in a good way. And the actor who played that character was really good. So for whatever reason, I think that probably was a scene where there was a shift in my mind of to kind of like, okay, so this is the type of thing we can expect, and they're not shying away from, maybe some weirdness in terms of things that at least we would not be used to. As it sounds weird to talk about like that takes place in the future, and that's not necessarily what's going to happen, but kind of like maybe something that could happen or maybe be possible down the road, but kind of like I accepted it and thought it was a cool thing. So that sticks out to me, but I'm assuming yours is different. But what was the scene that stuck out to you?
So it's the same episode, but before I get to that, I want to. There's a YouTube channel I just discovered called The Body Language Guy. So go
Okay.
check that out if you have a chance. But after watching that, I literally watched his. I discovered his channel like yesterday, and then now watching that scene again where he's taking that enhancement drug to like analyze their body language and their facial tics and everything. I'm like, oh,
Right.
that totally makes sense. Like, because when I watched it too, that was like, oh, this is like, all right, we're getting into like big sci-fi territory. Now I'm like, oh, maybe that's not as far down the road as I thought it was, which was cool because it's like
Yeah.
this still this like really interesting element to include in the show. Kind of reminded me a little bit about Firefly and like the 2x2 Hands of Blue people.
Right.
Um, but so I think it was the same episode for me where I had that moment, and it was when Shed lost his head. So when that shrapnel goes
Mm.
through and you pan, so
Oh
it's a
yeah.
really, that scene. It's a really great scene where he's, this medic and he's tossing something to help calm Alex down. And then before, because they're in zero G, and before that, whatever it is, medicine reaches Alex, a hole just appears and it like sucks the thing back out,
Oh
pans
yeah.
back, it pans back to him that completely headless with the blood going straight up out the
Right.
hole. It was
Out of the
just
back.
this really intense scene. And for me, it was like, okay, these characters that I thought were our main characters, maybe not all of them are safe. And so that
Right.
was like kind of a Game of Thrones kind of moment for me there.
Yeah, that's it's funny that you bring that up. Having watched it over the last few weeks, some of those earlier episodes, there's probably certain scenes that I forgot, and I honestly did forget, probably because that character died so early in the show. You kind of just forget about him. But that it was that is a very good point, because I remember when that happened, I was like, oh, so this is they're not going to shy away from that type of violence in regards to. And I
Mhm.
wouldn't say it was gratuitous, but it was like pretty over the top in regards to like, all right, the blood is getting sucked out of the ship, out of his, severed body. And that, yeah, that was super intense.
It was gnarly. And then when they finally sealed that hole and
Mhm.
or what happened? No, the ship went into thrust again, which created gravity, and then all that blood just splattered straight down. Like a very, very gnarly
Yes,
scene.
yes, that was awesome. Yeah, that was a great question though in terms of the shifts, because that whole episode, it sounds like, at least for the both of us, was a big shift in terms of what we thought might happen. Um, I wanted to get your thoughts too as we get deeper into, so just kind of the overall themes of the show. And as I was thinking about the type of things I wanted to talk about, I think the one, again, probably the more obvious one, was in terms of relation to what's going on in our world, was this tension between the different, I guess, what I'll call societies of the Earthers, the Belters, and the Martians. I thought was kind of a cool dynamic in the show. And one thing I wanted to ask you about, and I guess obviously you have the context of the rest of the show, so some of this stuff might get answered. And I don't know if the show necessarily did a great job of us completely understanding why there was so much tension between, I guess, particularly the Earthers and the Martians. And what came to mind to me was, because in my mind, I would think that relationship would have to be pretty close in regards to, Earth colonizing Mars and there being that natural connection. But what came to mind to me, and maybe this has been brought up online, was the relationship between England and America when obviously the break that happened there and the Revolutionary War and all of that, things like that. So uh that was what kind of came to mind, like, oh, maybe something like that must have happened, because I didn't necessarily understand why there was such a big tension between them in regards to the power struggle. So I don't know if that's a thought that came to your mind, or if or what you thought about that particular relationship between Earth and Mars.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head perfectly there with the theme of colonization. With as it's just inherent in mankind is our desire to spread outwards, and then with our the way we view power and the way we want to impose that power on others as we spread outwards. There's the center from which we're leaving from, and we have the desire to keep this and impose that strength and power onto the places that we're spreading to. But of course, just naturally, we can't do that, because in order to do that, like we saw with England and America, just the distance, it makes it impossible to expand that power and to keep a colony under control. And so, yeah, I think that's definitely what happened with Earth and Mars. Is it started very much the same and as just a colony, and then eventually declared its independence. And yeah, I think that that's a perfect analogy with England and America. And I think that theme of colonization is something that will definitely continue to be built upon as the show goes on.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that that is going to be continued to be explored, because the more I thought about it, the more I thought, like, oh, that is kind of cool to think about in terms of, like, if you were born and you grew up on Mars and just feeling that kind of ownership of that society. And we don't know the full length in terms of what that, at least from what I remember, they haven't shown much of Mars in terms of what it looks like and how much of it's been, what I assume, terraformed and colonized, in terms of if it's just a section of the country, or is the country of the planet, or, the entire thing. So I'm assuming we'll see a little bit more of that. So I'm pretty excited about that. But I guess the area that we see the most of is the belters,
Oh,
is
I
what.
lost you for a second.
You lose me?
Can you, yeah, can you restate that?
Yeah, no problem. I can always edit that there.
Right on.
Um, so the area that I believe that we see the most of, that I also find very, very interesting, is the belters who live on these different space stations, and kind of where they fit within this, this tension between Earth and Mars, kind of being, I guess, the middleman, but also kind of the, I guess, the workhorse, maybe, essentially, of between the two of them, and them feeling a bit downtrodden and taken advantage of in a lot of ways, and maybe not feeling like they're not cared about in the grand scheme of things. So I thought that was a pretty interesting thing to see, especially with particularly the character of, is it Miller, Joe Miller, the
Mm,
detective, one of the main
mm.
characters of season one, and getting to see kind of how he goes about navigating being a cop in that society. So how do you think they did a good job handling or showing the, I guess, struggle of what the belters would represent, I guess, in terms of what we might think of in modern society?
For sure. And I'll bring in a little bit from the book here. And it's not a
Awesome.
spoiler, it's just an impossibility of interpreting on film. So we get a little bit of it with the character that Christian Avasarala is torturing. I think in like episode 2, that really long, lanky dude with the long limbs. You
Yeah.
remember that guy?
Yeah, I really
Yes.
liked that scene because of just like the thought and the science behind of like torturing somebody using just the gravity on the
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's a cool, like, not that it was cool that he's being tortured, but I was just like, oh, somebody like had to really think about, like, oh, their bones would be brittle and wouldn't be able to handle, so therefore we can use that to our advantage. So anyway, just wanted to bring that up because I remember thinking like that was another point of that show where I was like, oh, like they really thought about, or maybe more so the original art author of the books was like, oh, he really thought about like what that might look like.
Yeah, and that's why I love this series so much. It's just the thought that goes into, okay, scientifically, with our current understanding of physics and everything, how would things look? And so the show and the books do that exceptionally well with those details. Um, but there's not many actors that look that like that guy. And so in the books, a lot of belters, that's the majority of them are like that. Just their bodies are completely uh, not completely different, but very much different from Earthers and even Martians, just because they grew up in zero G, and so they have longer limbs, and their bodies aren't acclimated to gravity. And with Miller, we see a little bit of that because he had this sort of I don't know, some sort of surgery mark left on his neck due to growing up in that low G and his neck expanding a bit and needing to be compressed or whatever. The show goes into it a little bit, but um, so very much these the Belters are very other uh, from Earth and Mars. They're very much their own people. They have their own culture. They have their own views and ways of life. And someone like Miller is interesting because he works for an Earth corporation, even though he himself is a Belter, and so he has that inner tension with, okay, I'm getting my money from Earth here, so I have to do my job, but I'm enforcing it's again that colonization thing. I'm enforcing the power from Earth onto my people here, and it doesn't always make sense, and it doesn't always jive well with him. And yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic, and I think Miller, and then we'll see that more with Naomi as the show goes on, are both great looks into what it's like for Belters and that dynamic with the inners.
Yeah, I'm glad you
as
brought
they
up.
call them.
I'm glad you brought up Miller working for an Earth corporation, essentially, in the sense that I think a few characters even bring it up. Like I think he's like literally like arresting somebody. They're like, "Oh, you just work for the Earthers, blah blah blah. How could you do this to your own kind?" And he kind of probably says something sarcastic, if I remember correctly, back to them. But
as Miller would do.
right, and he has kind of this narcissistic self-hatred kind of attitude to himself. So that's not, I guess it's almost not too surprising that a character like that would maybe end up a cop. So I thought you did a great job explaining kind of where the Belters fit in the grand scheme of things. So there was a few things that I did want to bring up, more like small little details, and get your thoughts, because I do have my notes up that I had taken during some of the episodes, because I just like wanted to remember a few things that just kind of stuck out to me. And these are more just like fast things I want to get your thoughts on that I thought were kind of funny or just like interesting tidbits. So one of the notes that I have is kicking things still work. And I think that was something to do
you
with...
cut out again. Sorry. I heard kicking things still were...
All good. Yeah, I'll start over. So one of the tidbits that I had written down in my notes as I was going through some of these episodes was kicking things still work. And I think that had to do with like they were on a ship trying to get something to work and they kicked it and it worked. And I was like, oh, so I guess like hundreds of years down the road, like that's still how we fix our machines or our computers. So I don't know if you noticed anything like that when you were watching the show, or if that's in the books as well.
I love that scene. So that's when they are stranded in the night, which is a little shuttle, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it's right after the Canterbury, remember the Kant, got blown up, and they're stranded and they're trying to get it to work. And yeah, they end up like going through all this ingenuity with like Naomi using her vast knowledge of things to like get all these pieces together to try to get it to work, and like venting the ship of all air to show like their desperation to get this to work. And meanwhile, Alex and Shed are dying. They're like running out of oxygen. And so yeah, that was a great moment of just, okay, utter desperation. We're just going to use physical force here to try to to try to get this to work, and it works. And I feel like that's a good thing to draw attention to because, yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more moments like that in the show. No spoilers.
No, that's not too surprising since I assume there'll be a lot of time on their ship going around doing things, I assume. But I just thought it was more so funny. Like when you think of like down the line or in the future, or let's say 300 years down the line, and let's say we're in a similar situation where we've colonized Mars and we're exploring more and things like that. And just this idea that like technology is still at this point where like where we're mad or we're frustrated, we like still like hit it and we like we yell at it and things like that. I just thought it was funny. Like, oh, you'd think it'd be a little more like savvy, but it's like, oh, this stupid thing, and you punch it and then it works.
Sometimes just gotta brute force it.
Right. So I thought that was funny. So I had a few notes around that. So I won't expound on that too much, but this one I want to get your thoughts on too, because it really caught me off guard, and it makes complete sense that this would be part, or that these specific group of people would be part of the expansion of space exploration, and that would be the inclusion of the Mormons. When they first came into the show, I was like, first of all, I laughed really hard because I thought that was hilarious.
Did it catch you off guard a little bit?
It did, because it was just like, oh yeah, the Mormons, and they were very obviously explicit that that's who they were, and they very much look exactly how Mormons look now, which also isn't surprising. So I just thought it was really funny, and then the more I thought about it, I was like, from what I know about the Mormon religion, it makes perfect sense that they would be heavily, heavily involved in the exploration of the universe and planets specifically and all that. So I was like, this is hilarious, and it makes perfect sense. And like another thing that happened in the show where I was like, okay, like they really thought about these details of like that these specific group of people, one, would still be around, and two, that they would be heavily involved financially in building whatever tools they need or what they think they need to expand knowledge and things like that. So just wanted to get what your reaction was when they first came to the show in terms of their introduction.
Yeah, my first reaction was like, wait, what? That's similar, like, and then it's like, oh, actually that makes sense, because like Mormons are, quintessentially American. They're the quintessential American religion, and they are that spirit of the frontier and exploration and being pushed away from people. And so, yeah, space exploration fits completely with them, that they would be, and it's part of their the part of the Mormon mythology too, is that every man will get his own planet. And so how much better does that fit with a space exploration thing where Fred Johnson is building them the Nauvoo, another very Mormon term, that first Mormon city. And in order to go find a planet that's literally like a manifestation of their soteriology and their their eschatology, yeah, it fits perfectly. So I love that aspect of the authors including something that makes sense. But then on top of that, and the reason I love their inclusion in the show so much is that it's quintessentially sci-fi too. Like think about Battlestar Galactica, very much a Mormon mythology show written by a Mormon. Orson Scott Card, the famous sci-fi author whose influence is very, very noticeable across all sci-fi, including this show. He was a Mormon. So like this is it's hand in glove, Mormons and sci-fi. It's just can't ask for a better match.
Yeah, you make a lot of good points too about the mythology of their religion and how that fits into this show specifically, but sci-fi in general. And I didn't actually realize that the last author that you'd mentioned, I can't remember his name now, but he was somebody.
Orson Scott Card, Ender's Game, that guy.
Yeah, yep, exactly. And well, he was somebody that I was familiar with growing up with my dad being a nerd as well and reading a lot of sci-fi. That was an author he would talk a lot about. So, and I didn't realize he was Mormon in that.
Yep. A couple others, Brandon Sanderson. He writes.
Is he really?
Yep.
I had no idea.
Yep. Right. Excellent author.
Man, the Mormons, they do good with sci-fi.
And we cannot forget to mention the best Mormon writer, Stephenie Meyer.
Oh gosh. Is that Twilight?
That's Twilight. Yep.
Gave us a lot of memes, so that's pretty good.
Yeah.
I can't complain there. So no, I did not realize that all those authors were Mormon. So that makes a lot of sense. That's super interesting. And yeah, I think they're just the perfect inclusion in the show in terms of, like you said, it just makes perfect sense that they would be as involved as they are. And I assume, not really much of a spoiler, that they were going to be more and more involved in the show in regards to Fred Johnson and things like that.
So excited to talk to you about how the Mormons influence the show, and especially how the Nauvoo impacts the show. I'm so excited to talk about that.
Oh man. All right. Well, I'm super excited now because I found that super interesting, and we didn't get a ton of them in the show so far, outside of a few scenes and a few mentions. But yeah, I'm super excited now. So looking forward to being able to talk about that more once I get there. So
I should mention something too. One weird thing about the first couple seasons of the show is that they don't line up with where, like, the book ends is not where the season ends. So season one, and we'll probably get into this, season one has kind of a weird ending there with how it ends. But just keep in mind as you're watching season two, episode 5 is where book 1 ends, and you'll notice a very prominent reason. It'll jump out to you that would be, of course, where that first plot point would end. So just bringing that up now before I forget.
No, that's I'm glad you brought that up too. And I feel like when I was reading, after I finished the last episode, I was looking at just a few wikis, reading through just to make sure there wasn't anything like major that I missed. Season 1, and I think there are a few of them mentioned it was like 75% of season 1 is the first book. So I assumed it bled a little bit into it. So I'm interested to see what that end point will be. That I'm assuming kind of a shift in the show as well. So
yeah, I'm excited.
Wow. Okay.
So excited.
A lot to look forward to. So yeah, I wanted to get your reaction on the Mormon inclusion, just because that was one of those fun surprises in the show, and continues to, again, the more and more I think about it, the more interesting it is to me. So just a few other things I wanted to bring up with you, more so, I guess, specific characters. So one of the characters I really, really liked was Anderson Dawes.
Yes.
I think particularly I liked him so much because of the actor who played him, Jared
Harris. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Excellent actor. Love him, everything he's in. I believe he was in The Crown season 1 as Queen Elizabeth's father, he did an amazing job there. So seeing him come into the show, like, I had no idea who was in it. So when I saw, especially that he wasn't like a main character, I was like, how'd they get this guy in the show? Granted, I think this was before, but he's been around for a long time. His father was a legendary actor as well, who played the first Dumbledore in Harry Potter. So I thought Jared Harris brought a lot of interesting acting choices to the character, made him very distinct. Love his indistinguishable accent that he had, that I think, again, makes a lot of sense for, people on that station, and with everything going on there. So just want to get your thoughts on that character in terms of your reaction to him in the show, comparatively how he is in the book. So any thoughts that stick out to you?
No, perfect casting. And I almost feel like when the writers were writing this character, that they had Jared Harris in mind. That's just how perfect he is for that role. And yeah, you're right about his accent, because the Belters, with their accents and their like lingo, he's just a perfect fit for that too, because he's doing a little bit with his accent, like really fit into that Belter lingo. And I feel like a lot of actors down the road really owe him quite a bit for like moving the Belter dialogue that way, the Belter accent that way. It's perfect casting. Such a phenomenal actor. That's all I gotta say about that. I'm super, super thrilled every time I see him on screen in this show, and we will see him more, of course.
Awesome. Yeah, I assumed he'd play a bigger part, just given the type of actor that he is and the character's importance to the show in terms of my understanding of him, leading the OPA faction on
a faction of the OPA
on series. So excited to see him again. And just a small note before I move on, kind of, again, just one of those details that I really liked. And again, I assume is in the book, and you can tell me this is the language that is spoken on Sirius, I guess specifically, but I assume on all the Belter stations. I guess the term would it be Creole in terms of like this mixture of all of these different
Yep.
languages that have come together, which again was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense if you're sending all these people to these stations and they're from different countries and they're from, different languages, that naturally there's going to be this new language that comes out of it. That's this mixture of English and different things. So I always liked it in the show, even if it was just like a side character who has like a couple lines, like says like a random phrase or like a random sentence in the kind of the Creole language. Cause I was like, it kind of just brings this legitimacy and like realism to where we're at. Like, oh yeah, these people like are very unique to this specific section of life, I guess, now in terms of Belters. So I just really enjoyed that detail of that. Yeah, there's going to be this language that to us sounds very foreign and like something we've never really heard before, at least Western, us Western people who aren't used to having a lot of languages and things like that in terms of
specifically Americans.
Yeah, we're definitely that. So
yeah,
again, a great detail.
Beltalowda.
Yeah. So is that something that is in the books in terms of like that language being something?
The show does it so much. The show does it so much better.
Oh, cool.
In the books, it's sort of, I mean, the lingo is there, the Creole is there, and it's really just a mixture of words from different languages. But I feel like the show really makes it feel like it's its own internally consistent, its own language, taking references from and building off of the languages that inform it. But it really feels like its own thing in the show. Yeah, I feel like the show does it way better.
Interesting. Yeah, that must be usually, there's always these things like, oh, I wish the show did this better because the book did it better. But it sounds like this is an instance where, in your experience, where the show handled something better in regards to how they show the Belters' uniqueness and the language that they've developed over what I assume is decades, centuries that they've been there.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me that if they, hired a language specialist to really work on that, in the same way that I'm thinking about Dothraki now from Game of Thrones, like that was expanded into a language that you can like learn and everything, or like Klingon, but I feel like the authors of the Expanse series, maybe that wasn't their strong suit when they were writing it. It was more like these big ideas and the science and stuff, and not necessarily the language. So yeah, the show really benefits from having that included.
Yeah, I should look into that because there is, and I've watched quite a few. I think it might be Wired, but they have a couple of videos where the guy who worked on like the languages on like Game of Thrones and things like that, kind of talking through his process of developing languages. And he's worked on basically any major fantasy or sci-fi show that has like a distinct language or a new language. He's probably worked on it. So
yeah,
I should definitely link that down below if I remember to do that, and I'll send it your way as well. It's super fascinating in terms of his thought process there. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was either him or somebody like him who was like literally like, hey, here's this language, like, can you make it make sense so that it sounds like a legit thing? So
yeah, for sure.
That's awesome.
And the nice thing about Belter, the Creole, is that every station is going to kind of have its own thing going on. So like there's this, the string, of commonality between them, but then you can like still do so much with it since each station can have its own thing. So really cool concept.
Yeah, that's a good point about how each station probably would have its own distinct version of it, like we see all around the world in terms of language, but maybe certain dialects that come out. So that's super fascinating. So on the subject of, I guess, not language, but I guess voice and speaking, I want to get your opinion on, and I can't say her full name in the show, but Christian
Avasarala.
Yes, kind of my understanding being kind of I'm not sure her exact position, but kind of an Earth ambassador, decision maker.
I think she's like third in command or something.
Okay,
like that,
yeah, I knew she was high up, but I wasn't sure exactly where she landed. But just like it did take me a few episodes to get over that actress's voice. It's like the deepest, like vocal fry speaking voice I've ever heard in my life. And I was just like,
Yep.
anytime she would talk, I was like, is this really what she sounds like?
It's very intense. Very I love it personally.
Yeah,
I
I
find it
don't
very
dislike it.
nice.
It just kind of like when she would first talk, I was like this is for real. Like this is how
Is
she
that coming
sounds.
out of that person's mouth?
Right. Like you wouldn't see her and be like, yeah, she's gonna have like the deep, like
Yeah.
she has like a deeper voice than like most, men and things like that. So I just thought it was kind of interesting,
Hmm.
just from a acting actress standpoint that that's her voice. Uh, but her character is her character in the book? Because I thought I remember
She's not
reading.
in book one.
Oh, she's not. Okay. Because I thought I remember reading something in one of the wikis about season one saying like her character wasn't in the books, but I wasn't sure if that meant like not at all or if that was just the part that we see in
Yeah.
season one.
Yeah, so a lot of the political stuff that's going to be occurring, obviously that occurred in season one, but as you go forward in future seasons, a lot of that is taking from future books because, or coming up with original material because, there's so much political intrigue in this show. Like, yeah, it's centered around our main characters and stuff, but it really benefits from having the political stuff fleshed out. Like, Christian, obviously, well, not obviously to you, but becomes a bigger central character down the road. Um, and so having her included earlier on in the show, I feel like makes a lot of sense so that, you know, viewers get to know her, get to know her character, her like motivations and like what she experiences. And that also allows this broader view, broader, maybe not broader, this more examined, closer view at the political stuff that's going on that's affecting all the other players on the board. So um, yeah, she shows up later in the books, but I think moving that stuff earlier helps quite a bit.
Yeah, that does make sense in this in regards to without her, I feel like we wouldn't have a lot of insight of what was going on Earth, in terms of where they're at in the story currently. So um, I think, yeah, based on what you said, where she's in the books and where he's now, it makes a lot of sense that they move that up, and certainly doesn't seem to hurt the show in any way having her there and getting to see some of the interactions that she has and slight connections that she has with some of the characters in the show in terms of her, I guess, investigation of them and things like that. So, yeah, interesting character and again, interesting voice. So,
Yeah,
the only reason I brought up her voice is because I remember writing something down in my notes about
she's
like low voice question mark like
it's
this
a
is really
very distinctive voice.
right.
I wonder if that's a lifelong smoker's voice type thing, or who knows what, but it's very distinctive.
Yeah, if that's like her regular speaking voice, she certainly brings a very specific a very specific type of character that she would play. I guess when you cast her, like this is what you're going
Hmm.
to bring, because she probably wouldn't
Yep.
be able to do a certain kind, given her voice. But
Yep.
yeah, I thought she did a very good job in terms of the actress specifically playing that character. So I liked her. But the last, I guess, major discussion point I want to bring up to you, and there's probably a lot you're not going to be able to say about this, is the big mystery, at least in my opinion, is what this thing is that's infecting. And we haven't even talked about Julie Mao at all, obviously,
Yeah,
in
Julie
regards to the
Mao. And
obviously a sad end to her character. I'm assuming we see a little bit more maybe about what her backstory is potentially, but with Miller investigating her or pursuing her throughout the show, trying to find her, and then we get to see the what ultimately happens with her being infected with whatever this thing is. I'm
mhm.
assuming you know a lot more. Again, probably not much you can say. So I guess a question that I want both of us to answer is at the end of season one, and maybe you'll have a hard time remembering this. What did you think that infection, that virus, whatever it was, like, did you have like a theory going into, and obviously you can't confirm whether or not your theory is correct, but like, did you have a specific thought
Yeah,
of like,
that's
oh, this is what I think it might be, or this is what I think it might be doing? So I just wanted to see what your thought was, because again, the season one ends with you not really knowing what it is or what it does specifically. So wanted to
yep.
know when you finished it, like what would, like you were like, oh, this is what I think it might be.
The only reason I can answer this is because I remember specifically like what my theory was. So I'm not going to say whether or not my theory was right or wrong, and there's going to be nothing that I'm going to say that's going to indicate that one way or the other. But I will say that my theory was that there was some weird, like, time travel stuff associated with it, because of how um, Miller was like. So for me, the moment for me that was weird and was like, oh, maybe there's some like trippy, like space time messing, like with time type stuff going on, was when Miller is in Julie's apartment and he sees that bird, that same bird he had seen earlier in the season, uh, floating there, and then he has this like um, realization. And then later on, when he sees, or rather, when we see from Julie's point of view, as she's dying, as she's being taken over by whatever this is, she sees a vision of Miller, with the bird, hovering above his hand. And I'm like, what is going on here? Like, there's some sort of weird, because that wasn't happening at the same time, So I'm like, is there some sort of weird, like, yeah, it was trippy, and that was my theory, was that it had something to do with like super sci-fi time manipulation stuff. So
Gotcha. Yeah, the bird. I'm glad you brought that up too, just because I hadn't thought about that in a while, the bird thing. So I'm assuming that'll come into play at some point in the show. So I'll keep an eye out for that. But yeah, I know you just have to shrug at this point for me.
So we'll come back and talk about
yeah,
that later, because
yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we will. So where I sit with it currently, so a couple things, my thoughts are, and again, you're just gonna have to nod your head and be like, yep, sounds legit. Was so I think so it's apparent that this, whatever this virus, liquid, whatever it is, appears to only be able to be created within human, or at least life, or something that's living, because they harvested out of Julie Mao. They infect all the people on, I think it's Ceres, or one of the other space stations that they're at. So they're obviously trying to harvest it, or at least that's the impression I get, because they're trying to, they start, taking it out of the people or whatever. So makes them very sick, things like that. So that's one part of it, is that it's some sort of living, not necessarily living, but it's a viral, bacterial, something that infects and then takes over the body. So there's that. But then it also appears to have some sort of ability to take over technology as well, or machinery, from what I can see, because I believe the first time we really see it is on that ship, either the Cant or the Scapuli.
Shoot, I think we see it on the Anubis.
Is it the Anubis? I think you're right.
No, they blow up the Scapuli. You're right, it's the Scapuli.
So the first time we see it, I think you're right, it's one of those two. But from what I remember in that episode, it was like, yeah, we see it on the reactor, if I remember correctly. So it appears to have been either intentionally placed there or naturally found itself there. So which makes me think, oh, okay, so it also has some sort of property that makes it lean or be able to take over technology. And we see like this very, very short clip at the very end of season 1 with that one guy that they capture, who, has his little contact camera or whatever, and he runs into it, and we get to see a little bit more of it, and it confronts him, and it like makes like this weird digital copy of him, and then it like grabs him in the face and brings him up this giant tall corridor, and there's like, it's kind of very Stranger Things looking in terms of like how it, is looking. So all that to say, my theory is that whatever this thing is it appears to be some sort of like biological substance that also has a property to control technology. Like the thing that I keep going, it's hard to describe because it's almost like, those Avatar movies where it's kind of like this weird like connection between, where it's like they can connect into the earth and like access all the data or memories that have happened within the world. It's kind of like I'm viewing it almost like that. It's like this living biological thing that also has this technological side that it can tap into. So that, yeah, I'm not doing a great job describing too, but that's what I think it is. I have no idea what the purpose of that would be or why they would want to control that. But that's my theory because it appears to be something that can only be created biologically through the, humans, and obviously kills them, but does something as well in terms of overtaking ships technology as well as what appears to be taking over the station as well. So that's my standing theory of what it is. I don't know why they would want to create more of it or what they think it is, if it's some weird cult thing. They're worshiping some god. So that's where I sit. And the unfortunate part is you can't confirm any of that, and I don't want you to, but
I can't. But I will add some content here as a response to that.
Yeah.
It would, in an alternate reality, it would have been fun to have watched The Lord of the Rings as like a weekly, like broken down into seasons, and to have theories about what the One Ring is. Like that's what I was thinking right now. Is like, how fun would that be? Trying to like figure out what this thing is. Like, yeah, that's
good.
all that. Yeah, but yeah, that's all I can say. Yeah.
Okay.
That's not even an analogy or anything.
Okay. I wasn't sure because I was thinking, I was like, okay, if he's going that direction, that's kind of an interesting way to think about it. But yeah, I see where you're going there. So
no spoilers.
Yeah. Wanted to ask your reaction because I knew, as I was like, I'm sure when the show came out, there was a lot of discussion around like, what is this stuff? What is this, this blue glowing liquid that appears to have some sort of sentience, but
yeah, they haven't given a name to the substance in the show.
They haven't.
Right?
That's why it's like, I'm like, it's hard to like talk about it because there's not a name. Yeah. So it's like, like, oh, the purge or like whatever. So yeah, interested to see what they do there in terms of whether it has a name. I'm assuming we'll see a lot more. That seems to be the big mystery in terms of what it is. And obviously was the end of Julie Mao in terms of her ultimately being, I guess, the patient one in regards to them being able to get it out and then make the whatever it was they needed to make to infect the rest of the people of Ceres, which I think was where it happened. So wanted to just get Eros. Yes. I was like, I don't think it was
a winner on Eros.
That's right. Because I was like, I knew that Miller had left and gone to a different station, but I wasn't sure. I couldn't remember the name. So yeah, thank you for
Eros is the Greek god of love.
Greek god of love. Interesting. Awesome. So yeah, appreciate you recalling what that was, because I'm very interested to see where my theory lands in regards to if I'm in any form right about that. Because I was like, I feel really clever in some regards. Like, oh yeah, I feel like I really got that. But that's the fun part, because it's like when it does happen, I can be like, oh, I'm dumb, or like, oh, I was kind of right. So
well, hey, now it's recorded. Yeah, so I'm excited to talk about it more.
Yeah, me as well. Because yeah, that's what I feel like these early seasons, especially it's with me being on season 1 of, I believe, 5 so far. It's like for you, a lot of it's like, I can't tell you this, but this is happening. So
and just kind of a not really a random thought, but kind of like connected without going into any spoilers. But it's like in season 1, and it's like kind of convoluted with the plot. But what we do know is that whatever that substance is, like the earliest in the plot that we know where it's at is on Phoebe, the moon. So yeah, it was because the first time I watched season 1, like trying to like keep track of like, number 1, where Julie was, number 2, where like all these conflict skirmishes were happening between, especially with Holden's crew, and like trying to keep track of everything. That was a little tricky. Rewatching it now and like, oh, okay, Phoebe, I can remember that. So
yeah, there's certainly things that like Phoebe, for example, they do bring up a couple times, but I'm kind of like, don't really remember or know what the significance of that is yet. So it sounds like something that'll become more apparent.
Well, they keep saying that it's like a restricted like research place.
Oh, so, right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep, that's right. I think you're right on that. So must come up again. So we'll see. So I think that's a good place to stop, just getting towards the end of season 1.
No, we have to talk about one more thing.
Oh, go. Yeah.
This show is amazing because it has so many like sci-fi elements. And then the conclusion for season 1 is freaking zombies. We get like a zombie genre in here with like the infected people like basically being zombies.
Kind of, yeah.
I just have to appreciate appreciate that aspect in the season finale.
Okay,
That's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, gotta have zombies. That's the
For sure.
where all things ultimately go, it seems like. But yeah, plenty of good series. Obviously, still use zombies, but do them in interesting ways. So
yeah,
excited to see more of that. So Josh, thanks for hopping on and discussing season 1. Brought up a lot of things that I'm excited to, I guess, keep an eye on as I get into season 2. And of course, we'll have you back on to discuss season 2 once I'm done here in the next few weeks. So anybody
Absolutely.
who is still listening, if you're interested in hearing more conversation on that, feel free to subscribe to my channel. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below on your impression of season 1 or anything else that we talked about specifically. And if you have any interest in comic books or the comic book market, Josh gives a lot of great insight of that on his channel on Questler Comics, just past 500 subscribers, I think the other week or a few weeks ago. So congrats on that, Josh.
Thank you.
Big milestone. And I know you'll hit 1,000 here probably here in a little bit as well. So excited for you on that, especially in the infancy of my channel with the little subscribers I have, but excited to keep building that and appreciate you coming on to discuss this.
Right on. Thank you, Aaron. Can't wait for the next episode.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching again. And like I said just a couple minutes ago, just feel free to let us know, Josh or I, what you thought on anything we brought up. If there's anything we didn't bring up that you thought was interesting, would love to talk to you guys more, whether that's down in the comments or Instagram or any way you want to contact me. So thanks again.
Remember the Kant.
Remember.